So I want to move straight on to what is going to be our first main panel session of the day. I think we've made it perfectly clear already that the issue of critical raw materials and their positioning in our world has shot up the list. I think the very fact that we are about to discuss geopolitical dynamics in securing Europe's defense supply chains tells us an awful lot about how this issue has moved not just center stage, but to the very near top of political agendas. So on that topic, geopolitics right up there, I'd like to call all members of our next panel, please, up onto the stage. Thank you. That is Nicola, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. We have Allard Castelein, Special Representative for Raw Materials Strategy in the Netherlands. We're joined also by Joaquim Almeida de Nunes, the Director at DG GROW, by Benjamin Gallezot, who is the Interministerial Delegate for Supplies of Strategic Minerals and Metals at the French Prime Minister's Office. And last, certainly not least, and welcome Oleksandr Kubrakov, who is Advisor to the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. And I'm going to start with a question, really, it applies to all of you, and obviously in slightly different ways, given that you come from countries, you come from institutions, we have a representative from industry as well, and of course from the European Commission. The question is fairly simple, it's how is your organization, your institution, your country interpreting and responding to today's geopolitical pressures on critical raw materials for defense? And I'll put the emphasis for now, Benjamin, on defense, and we will broaden that to security of supply in due course. But let me start with a representative from a country which I think is fair to say has been at the forefront of taking national initiatives in this area.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, we have to consider that the materials needed for defense, they are also used for civil industry. So it's at this route, at this stage of mining and processing, there is a common industry which builds these materials. So everything that you do to improve critical raw material in general is good for defense. But nevertheless, there are specificities. First of all, for defense, it's at the heart of the sovereignty of country, so you have to get maximum security of supply. You cannot take some chance on defense. Second aspect is just generally the quantity are smaller, so it's a good news for lots of metals. The quantity needed for defense are smaller. So considering all these two elements, what we have decided in 2023, and it was adopted by the French Parliament, is to have a specific legal framework for defense, which first of all makes stockpiling mandatory for companies that are active in defense. So they have to stockpile the quantity of metals and parts needed for the future need of defense. That's the first point. Second point is that we can prioritize defense production vis-à-vis civil production in case of emergency. And the last point of this legal structure is that we can réquisitionner, commandeer all kinds of activities to be redirected to defense production. So we have this legal framework, and of course, that can be activated. Stockpiling is activated now, but the other can be activated in case of emergency. And then we have, of course, specific project for defense with recycling, with specific metals or minerals that are used. So to put it in a nutshell, and I think what we have done, other member states should also do that. I mean, especially stockpiling. It's clear there can be all kind of question about stockpiling for civil application, but for defense, I mean, it's a no-brainer. We all have to do that.
So just to be clear, so the quantities are so small, there's no point trying to develop the rare earths sourcing.
I mean, when you talk about defense, whether it is equipment or maintaining equipment, you don't have the time, to develop new production. You have to get the metals here, so you need stockpiling. It's a necessity, and it's feasible. For a lot of material, it's feasible because the quantities are quite small.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to jump over actually to you, Allard, for your your hat as a special advisor to the Dutch government, having just reflected on what Benjamin has to say. What's the Dutch perspective there?
Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking the question. Before we continue, I'd like to ask the technicians to ensure that the sound on stage is as good as it is in the main auditorium, because otherwise it's very difficult to have an interactive exchange of thoughts. Coming back to the question, I think it's fair to say that the baseline of thinking resonates within the Dutch government and resonates within the Dutch defense industry in particular. But it's also fair to say that from a more, if you like, delivery perspective, the sense of urgency and how to bring matters together is still a bit of a challenge, to say the least. So with the relatively recently identified Dutch government, we've now set up the various work streams to start the detailed assessment of, for instance, the critical raw materials that are necessary to have a fully operational new frigates that the Dutch Navy wishes to build and has awarded the contracts for. I believe there's an opportunity to collaborate. Benjamin and I have also discussed, might there be a cross-border joint efforts to ensure that we do not reinvent the wheel on each side of the border. But from a understanding of the critical raw materials that are necessary for a fully operational frigate, to building strategic stockpiles associated to keeping them operational, to building in resiliency into an ecosystem going forward, these are quite long stretches of imagination and serious projects that we need to get into. So the baseline of understanding is appropriate. There's a growing understanding that with the increase of defense industry spend, we should build that into ensuring that our industrial ecosystems are more resilient as well, because there's no use having a resilient defense industry or a resilient defense capability and not having a resilient industrial activity. So you have to bring the two together and try and create a flywheel where the one and one becomes three rather than independent and separate activities. So a lot of work still required, and listening also to the previous panel, the big concern I have is the full appreciation across the board related to the sense of urgency and what it takes to move from A to B. Because my biggest concern would be that we conclude that the 2030 targets are out of reach, because I think we should be honest to each other. They are out of reach. Coming from the private sector, I know how long it takes to set up a new facility, to get a new manufacturing plant in Europe built, let alone extractive industries. That's 15 years plus. Circular economy likewise. So this sense of urgency, you need to come back to what are the steps that we ought to take to get to the necessary deliverable, and that should not translate to new policies. It should translate into what is required to get the various projects materialized. So let me leave it at that as an opening statement.
Yeah, we'll come back to that issue of where the challenge in sense of urgency really lies, which part of the sector in particular in a moment. But Joaquim, actually that sort of feeds rather neatly into you, because there's a fairly direct challenge about the CRM Act, the targets that are laid out there. The message from Allard is quite clear, they're too ambitious.
Yeah. I think we, in this area, are very much on what I would call the syndrome of the COVID gloves. What does Europe need to have? I mean, you know, there was COVID, there were no gloves, we dependent. I mean, there's nothing special about doing gloves. The world market can produce gloves. What does Europe, this calculation and political decisions need to be done on what needs to be done and mastered here. There's discussion about strategic industries. I mean, it's difficult. If there is a strategic industry, it's the defense industry. I mean, I don't think I can see any that would be more strategic than defense. On diplomacy, I think we also have to watch out in terms of, I mean, we should do as much as we can in Europe, and we are doing a lot in Europe. Of the 170 applications for strategic projects, we've already adopted a list of 47 European projects. There are more projects in Europe than outside of Europe. but we have to think in terms of finding reliable partners, and I would call a reliable partner a partner that would at least stay neutral and would guarantee security of supply if Europe has a conflict with a geopolitical competitor. And whether such places that supply raw materials to us have the capacity to stay neutral in such situations. I think that those are the questions that decision makers need to ask themselves in Europe. So I think there needs to be a lot of calculations of what the remilitarization of Europe means in terms of raw materials. What does that mean? We need X, Y, Z, tanks, battleships, fighters, etc. What are the raw materials that implies? I agree with Benjamin that often we're talking about small quantities, and we're often talking about projects that will be uncommercial forever. So nobody would, the state or the public sector have to be ready to subsidize them forever in some of these small quantities that are essential for defense. Things are starting, take time, but things are starting and we have to start from somewhere. Take graphite. Graphite is important for aircraft, submarines, tanks, missiles. We're 67% dependent on China right now. 11 of the 47 strategic projects were on graphite. Graphite is a dual-use raw material, but it is important also for defense. 2 on tungsten, 1 on magnesium. We've also got a lot of projects on rare earths, which are important also on a dual-use context. They're good for wind turbines, but are also good for missile guidance. Important also to see that a lot of member states are establishing raw material funds. We've got France, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, and Italy. I think there's certainly a big future for a raw materials policy and action. Thank you very much for having invited me.
No, you're very welcome to be here. Thank you very much. And thank you for that list, because I think it's important to remember there are these projects which are being brought online. Nicola, can I come to you then about the role of the EIB? In 2 respects. One specifically in defense supply chain sovereignty, if you like, but secondly within this whole critical minerals sector. I mean, your position has evolved, let's say.
Yes, but as the financial arm of the European Union, we are just the practitioner to bring the paper in projects which materialize on the ground. And of course, there the defense and security sector is a part of the whole question, how to diversify our supply chains when it comes to critical raw materials. We have this overlap with the NATO list of the 12, with the 34 in the Critical Raw Materials Act. But for us as bank, it's very important. We just set up a holistic approach. So we are going over the whole supply chain, all the 4 pillars when it comes to mining, processing, refining, recycling and substitution. We are working inside, outside. We are, as European Investment Bank, a bank who is crowding in private investments. So we are working together not only with the public side when it comes to regulators or governments, member states, EU level, but also with the promoters, the sponsors, the private investors. Also, not only those directly investing, but also investors coming more indirectly via funds or others. And we see a lot of interest in the market. One example from the strategic list projects, the bank is already engaged with about 60% of the projects so far. We have a very well-filled pipeline. And of course, we see in a very complex topic challenges, yes. But I think if we are altogether managing to overcome the sector silos, then we will really be successful in managing these challenges, because at the end, whether this is for defense and security or whether this is for the green transition, the digital transition, it is about the very individual profile, footprint of one special critical raw materials. And I think we have to look on this supply chain, on the specific challenges of every raw material separately. And this is a part of the challenge, but I'm quite optimistic that altogether, as I see the progress so far, we are able to manage.
Just before I come to Oleksandr, are you now putting more emphasis on defense-specific projects than you were, or if it's a CRM related, if it's a part of the critical mineral story, it's still got the same purchase, if you like, as it had before? Because obviously we're looking at individual member states, and we can pick out France, we can pick out Germany. The emphasis on defense spending has shifted markedly very quickly.
Yes, of course, and of course this has a special emphasis on the questions of security and defense. But if I go for these important materials, and graphite was mentioned, lithium was mentioned, tungsten was mentioned, of course this is important for security and defense, but as important also for other parts of the industry. And for us, every euro we spend in the support of the resilience of the European industry is a euro which is also supporting then our security and defense when you narrow it down.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much indeed. Oleksandr, first of all, thank you very much for being here. Once again, as ever, you have a very circuitous, challenging route just to get here, and you will no doubt to go back again, and I'm sure we all share the hopes that a ceasefire and a permanent arrangement will come soon. In the sort of broad perspective, and we've talked quite a bit about already partnerships and international partnerships, how do you see a partnership with Europe in terms of strategic critical mineral supply?
Again, thank you very much for your question, for this opportunity. I would start from some historical background, like where we are, where this industry. In Ukraine, I think it just will help to understand a little bit more. So during the last 30 years of independence period of time of Ukraine, unfortunately, we were not able to construct any new mine again during the last 30 years because, again, we have some developments. We have titanium project in Ukraine in this area, in this sector, but all key investments were done in USSR period of time. You mentioned graphite, lithium. All these minerals, they exist in Ukraine, they proved, and the deposits investigated. But again, only one simple answer, because this is not like small and medium business. This business required significant investments, hundreds of millions or billions of euros. That's very simple. So during the last 30 years, always Ukrainian local business was focused on more short-term projects. Time was different, and foreign investments, again, due to, I don't know, any political risk, etc., they are not invested in long-term project. This project, let's be honest, in this sector, they're quite long-term. This is, again, a cycle of those projects, 5, 10, 15, 25 years. This is required, stability, security stability, political stability, and other things. So right now, again, I think when everybody realized that, yes, Ukraine is on the way to EU accession, we are becoming closer, cooperation in many areas becoming more and more closer, I think it's time, again, previous speaker said, let's start act. And again, I understand that right now, security situation in Ukraine probably is not just the most suitable for huge and long-term investments. But again, you mentioned this, and everybody understands that this war will finish one day. And before that, again, there are a lot of things should be done during this period of time. Then, feasibility study, converting all Ukrainian and USSR feasibility studies into international standards. Prepare everything. It will require 2, 3, 5 years in some cases, all environmental assessments for new projects. So again, we shouldn't waste this time with EU partners. Many European companies, again, they could participate in such projects at these stages right now. So, I mean, it's I'm always emphasizing for all sectors. Again, when the war will finish, all these projects, all this, they will be prepared. We can start, and we discussed with Nicola, like role of European Investment Bank. Again, EU companies, Ukrainian companies, joint ventures, later on could be financed by European Investment Bank. And on this stage, again, feasibility studies. Let's work on this.
And in terms of, briefly, of guarantees that you need from this side of the fence, what are you looking for?
I mean, it's clear that in ideal world, this is NATO membership. That's the most reliable. Nobody invented something better or more trusted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that. I should point out that in another 15 minutes or so, I'd really like to open it up to you, to get you involved as well. We have a roving mic, so have a think if you've got questions you'd like to bring to our panelists as well. Let's just do strategic stockpiling, can we, Benjamin, now, and sort of nail down how that can work and who should be putting what into it. It's something that Commissioner Šefčovič brought up here last year as well. On what level? You do it very much on a national perspective. Is that the easiest way to make this a viable proposition? Each country does it their own way?
No. I think we did it on a national basis because we wanted to act urgently, not to lose time. But clearly, it's a European question. It's not just a national question, because the supply chain, even in the defense industry, are European supply chain, not national supply chain. So clearly, we decided, and we had this package, this law package, in 2023 that was adopted by our parliament. We decided to act because we think that stockpiling and also prioritizing production is necessary. But clearly, this has to be done also at the national level. And we are discussing with several member states on how we can, for example, French industry will provide submarines for the Netherlands. And so the French industry has to prepare all the materials needed for this program. So clearly it's a European matter, but I think for some reason, I mean, the equipment the contracts are done by the member states. So if you want to stockpile, you stockpile on the basis of the contract you have with the company. So clearly the member states have to act, but also we have to cooperate and also complement that at the European level. And I think it's clear that there is a strong rationale for stockpiling for defense, but civil stockpiling could also help. I mean, if the company increase for their general use, I mean, not only the defense company, but the companies throughout Europe increase their commercial stockpile, then when we have a crisis, when we have to increase the defense production, with the mechanism I mentioned, we can take this stockpile and use them in case of emergency for defense application. So you see that there are things that can be done for defense, but there are strong synergies between civil production and defense production. And what is true for stockpiling is also true for, processing, purchasing of materials and so on, because for large parts of these materials, they are the same for defense and for civil application.
And in terms, Joaquim, of bringing that together in a sort of European perspective, I think the CRM Act does also bring in an obligation for countries to outline where their potential risks and fallibilities lie.
Yeah, there are two things. The CRMA already provides that we have to establish a platform, and we're going to launch a call sometime around Q4 this year, a platform for supply and demand to meet. So just to foster, there's this need, there are these people who would like to supply, there are these people who would like to purchase, and then you guys get together and see what you can give to each other. That's already in the CRMA. Now, we're going to start working on that this year. and for the years ahead, this will continue. We are talking to industry to stimulate industry's interest in this functionality. This is also in the follow-up of the gas platform that was established as a follow-up to the severing of the ties with Russia because of the war against the Ukraine. But there's a second step, the Draghi report, and that has been taken up by the Clean Industrial Deal, asks us to establish a capacity to jointly purchase and stockpile raw materials and to invest on raw materials. So there's a big, important political initiative by the Commission on raw materials next year that we're also very busily working upon.
That's another money issue, though, isn't it? That's got a huge money challenge.
Exactly, but yes, indeed, one of the problems of Europe is the insignificance of its budget devoted to these areas. That's something that we hope would be addressed by the Competitiveness Fund, and hopefully the raw materials center would start operating the moment that the new financial perspectives would be in place. So I see some potential synergies there.
Thank you very much. Allard, can I just, again, linking you a little bit to what Benjamin was saying there in terms of the Netherlands, where this has to be about flexibility and agility and speed, as well as an overriding sort of mission to achieve strategic stockpiling. It's got to happen soon. On the EU level, that is going to be more challenging, 27 member states trying to work together. You can work, presumably, and I think you do, with France, with Germany, with Belgium, on smaller blocks. How important are those sorts of scales of block arrangements?
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe they're actually necessary to make progress. I'm actually very pleased with the early start France made through Benjamin and the efforts they've already put into place. And the Netherlands, I would like to learn from it. We'd like to collaborate. We'd like not to reinvent the wheel and build on it. And I see that further collaboration in a similar vein, where it's better to start with a coalition of the willing and showcase what is done, how it is done, what the pitfalls are, what the lessons learned are, and be as open and as transparent as you can possibly be. In my previous life in the private sector, I worked very, very hard on the energy transition. And energy transition and climate-related targets are not met by any enterprise, any country, any organization if they keep all the cards close to their chest. We need to be able to accept the mere fact that collectively we're stronger, and we should be open and bring others along rather than not allow people to look into the kitchen what the recipe looks like. So I sincerely believe that reaching out to the neighboring countries provides you with an automatic, almost joint agenda. It's well known that from the Netherlands is a small country, but logistics and connections are very, very strong. The port of Rotterdam has been the gateway to Europe for many goods and services provided. Army, defense, NATO are intertwined. Frigates are built in the Netherlands, but France is building two subs for the Dutch Navy, and Belgium is building 2 frigates as well. So it makes imminent sense to collaborate on this issue of strategic stockpiling and further resiliency into that defense ecosystem. So my sole aim is to reach out, to collaborate, to identify the opportunities, the initiatives, the projects, particularly where we can actually make a difference, and then share that with every like-minded European country that has a vested interest to join forces.
Okay, so some very good, clear, illustrative examples of what you're doing there. And Nicola, nonetheless, and you gave us ways in which you can facilitate a lot of projects, but where are the bottlenecks? Where are the real challenges for scaling up Europe's defense resilience from your perspective?
For me, the first bottleneck in the supply chain already starts with data and exploration, really of the best placed resources. Because when I come, for example, to the MOU we have as EU already since 2021 with Ukraine, so they are all Soviet data. Now what you have to do is to examine whether you better drill here or there. What is the quantity, what is the quality especially of the materials you can find. And this is for the moment something which is nearly not bankable. So I think that, especially in the next MFF, the EU has to find an answer, whether this go under the competitiveness fund, for example, because for the moment, under InvestEU, we are not able to facilitate such questions. And of course, this is a question of developing a new resource stream around really up to the whole supply chain. Then what I think is important, that we really come together over all the sectors on the specific raw materials. And this is especially necessary when it comes to the offtake agreements. Because at the end, as a banker, I have to see if a project is bankable. Yes, we come in as a promotional bank with a lot of advisory. So on the technical side, on the structuring of the financing, but at the end, I have to see where are the off-takers sitting. And even with the strategic projects, we see a lot of problem in this off-take. And this, of course, is related directly to the volatility of the prices. And maybe a last word, because the stockpiling you were discussing is a classical factor for risk mitigation. But what also can mitigate risk in such a supply chain is transparency. So which kind, which volumes, which quality of materials are where, and there we see that especially for the raw materials, this public marketplace is missing for a lot of the materials, and as smaller the quantities of the materials is, as easier it is to manipulate for other competitors the market price. And this, of course, makes it difficult, if not impossible, to finance a project. So I think we should speak as much as of stockpiling, of the transparency in the market, creating marketplaces, commodity exchanges or other instruments, because this then would give the chance also to mitigate the risk in the market.
That's interesting. I'm going to open it up to the floor in just a second, but Allard, I want to come back to something you said very early on, which was it was about recognition of the challenge that is being faced, and perhaps there's a challenge to assert that recognition. Was that through, is it industry that doesn't get it? Is it government that doesn't get it? I mean, you interact between the two. Where is your concern?
So this could take a full lecture, which I don't intend to give, but in trying to summarize where my concern is that this is a huge challenge. 34 critical raw materials, a market situation that has emerged over a period of well over 35 or so years. We're not going to turn it around overnight. And if we only wish to turn it around by what I've heard this morning already, by educating the population, by only starting with due respect when we have all the data, by only starting if we have all the countries aligned, we're not going to make progress. So I sincerely believe, again, coming from the private sector, that this is an effort, this is a transition, this is a disruption that we can only bring to fruition if we have a very intensive collaboration between public and private partners, and if we dare to be on the pitch whilst we develop the rules of the game. And with that I mean, we do not have the time, we should not allow ourselves the time to sit back and gather more and more data, get from the analysis paralysis situation, and not make any progress. We have to create the public-private partnerships where we identify where we want to be at in 2030, 35, 40, etc., and do a backcasting of what is required today. And then have a relationship and a coalition of willing of trust between the various parties that make progress on these projects. And that is one by one, and hopefully we create a snowball effect and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. But if we wait, and let me repeat, if we wait till we feel comfortable that we have all the data, all the information, all the alignment, all the definitions, we'll be sitting here talking till donkeys come home and till the cows come home until donkey's years. We won't make the progress. So my worry is that the sense of urgency does not resonate with the governments and the politicians, and the sense of urgency is not stimulated with the private sector because there's no incentive. There's no rules, regulation, and without rules or regulations, we don't generate demand, we will not create supply, and we will not justify investments in infrastructure. That's why we need to get into an active mode of collaboration between public-private partners at this juncture.
Okay, Benjamin, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, to answer your question, I think the level of awareness is much higher in the government side than in the company side. I mean, Europe has acted we acted at the European Union level, but also at the national level, and I think all the governments in Europe are perfectly aware of the risk and all the constraints. But I see that companies in Europe are still not sufficiently prepared. So there is the question of, there are all kinds of questions that explain that, but the level of awareness is not sufficient in the private sector. We decided with the CRM Act to act, I would say, with a light touch. I mean, CRM Act, it's not an heavy regulation. So companies have still the possibility to purchase like they want, to stockpile or not to stockpile. And I think it's right on the first place to have acted with a light touch. But we will have to consider more, I mean, it's a question, but a more strong regulation if the company don't act by themselves.
Thank you very much indeed for that. So I would love to bring you in if you'd like to bring yourselves into the equation. Can I see if there are any hands coming up who'd like to put a question? We have a hand down at the front here and one there. So who has the mic? That would be the key. If we could bring the mic, thank you very much. And then we'll go to the I saw another hand up somewhere up there. Thank you. Yeah, if you'd let us know who you are, where you're from, and the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Ayman. I'm working at Flynn Global, and I'm a defense and raw materials analyst. I have one question. So Mr. Gallezot discussed about the level of awareness of the private sector. And considering that EU defense companies are sometimes struggling to stay competitive with US, UK, or Asian companies when it comes to basically selling their product, what kind of incentives do you think are needed to encourage defense companies to buy EU critical raw materials while remaining competitive and not just buying cheaper CRMs elsewhere? Thank you.
First of all, when I mentioned the level of awareness, I was not specific for a defense company. I mean, defense companies are more aware of their supply chain risk than in general. I mean, they still have to improve, and there is a lot of margin of improvement on their side, but their level of awareness is clearly higher. I mean, for defense, it's completely different. I mean, the government are purchasing the equipment. So it's the role of the government to ask to the company exactly what kind of security they have to put in place. That's why we have decided to make stockpiling mandatory. I mean, it's a sovereign question. It's not a question of market. It's a question of decision by the government of the kind of security you want as supply. And it's the role of the government to say what are the needs. Because it's of course completely linked to the military planning we have. I mean, you have to stockpile. If I take this example of stockpiling, you have to stockpile considering what your equipment plant of the next 10 or 15 years, and considering what are the scenario of, if we're entering into a conflict. So clearly, it's the role of the government to define what kind of quantity of equipment we need, and then we work with the company to define the quantity and the type of what you have to stockpile. So for me, it's quite clear, and then you can have based on the resource we have in the EU and the things we have to import. All the things we have to import, we have to stockpile, because in case of crisis, you are not sure that you will be still able to import for various reasons. And the first reason is that the country with which you are dealing can say, okay, I will not provide you this equipment because it's going for defense application. So you have to consider that supply chains that are possible for civil application can be totally disrupted. And we perfectly know, even inside the European Union, that we can have some problem in that field, or with partners that have a commercial agreement with the European Union. We have experimented that during the support for Ukraine. I mean, there are all kinds of equipment that were built in France or in Germany that needed some supply chain coming from a country I will not name, but we perfectly know that there has been some problem because this country decided not to supply.
It's the country that has no name. Well, we
no,
all know which one it is.
No, I mean, there are all kinds of countries and it's, you know, it's in the rule, in all countries you have rule related to export of things that are necessary for defense. And raw material can be included in that kind of list.
We've actually been talking mostly here about defense, specifically about defense. Of course, security, yes, I'll bring you in. Security of supply across the piece is the challenge in any case. And perhaps the question is almost more pertinent to say to the rest of industry, how do you incentivize the rest of industry to start looking inwards for purchasing rather than to other countries? Is that a fair question? A fair point?
For the rest of the industry, it's much more difficult because it's not. I mean, the government cannot decide everything. I mean, it's more a partnership between the government and the company to establish exactly what are the needs of the stockpiling and so on. So, I mean, defense industry is really specific subject.
Yeah, Oleksandr.
Yeah, I would like to add a few words, if I may. I think it's everything connected, and from my point of view, from Commission side, again, we've heard a lot of signals to EU defense industry, but again, this like war in Ukraine, this is like final call to wake up, and just for industry, and I'm sure it required long-term financing, long-term contracts from EU Commission side. I mean, I'm talking about defense industry, and I think in parallel, critical minerals industry also will receive additional development because of if defense industry will grow, and the speed should be a little bit different. Like new European air defense system shouldn't appear earlier than, I don't know, in 5-7 years than it was scheduled before Ukrainian war. And in many other cases, I'm not just like criticizing, I'm just saying that like we are doing this, I mean, in Ukraine in a huge rush right now during the last 3 years, trying to start production of this, to find spare parts, to find minerals somewhere, to find the way how to deliver it to Ukraine, etc. So again, you have another situation, but again, to use this time probably more efficiently.
Yeah, quite right. Joaquim.
No, I just wanted to make a general point. I mean, I agree with Benjamin that on defense is probably the easiest area to come up with regulatory reasons and find exceptions of why you need to buy European projects. But where I see a problem that we need to anticipate, especially I talked about graphite. We have 11 strategic projects on graphite. China dominates 67% of the graphite market. Most of these projects, in order to be viable or bankable, have to show that they're competitive vis-à-vis the Chinese price, which is the price that makes the market. What if China, once these projects start coming to fruition, floods the market with enormous amounts of graphites, tries to kill our projects, and we need to start anticipating that we might need to protect the projects we are putting in the pipeline right now.
Nicola.
Yes, I just wanted to remind that on this question, for an entrepreneur, the question where to buy and when is part of the risk mitigation. And if you have a risk, this always comes with costs. So also from the financing side, of course, we are calculating all this risk in the business case. If we are not diversified, if you have not enough stockpiling, in your enterprise, if you cannot secure your production, then this is a risk factor within the equation your financial partner will also put on the price giving for a loan, for example. So I think that every entrepreneur for himself has a big interest in recalculating against the geopolitical shift whether he has really trustworthy supply chains, whether he has enough suppliers in the market, depending on the geopolitical situation. But the good signal here, especially for Europe, is that you have supporting partners also in the financial market, because, for example, EIB, with its big balance sheet, has the possibility to be a patient financial partner. So we can give risk mitigation by taking some parts of the risk in a business case, by having long-standing loans or other guarantee financial products. So I think that also this world changed. So I would really recommend to recalculate the business case in every specific product. And of course, you can then go for more risk on not so trustworthy suppliers. But I would recommend to do a really good balanced business case on that, because if not, your price will also go up if you have not trustworthy partners also in the supply chain.
Recalibrate is almost a cultural shift as well. Allard?
Yeah, I'll be brief.
You'll have to be.
If we keep doing what we've always done, we will not get a different answer. Yes. And the private investor, irrespective of everything you said, will need the guarantees, otherwise they will not take the decision in the boardroom. Been there, ran a boardroom for 10 years, they will need contract for differences, they will need a minimum offtake guarantee, they will need a profitability guarantee for an interim period of time. Let's not think of all these challenges as something that need to be in place for the next 50 years. We need to get over the hurdle of this disruption getting going, and that's the next 10-year period or something or other. Thereafter, normal market circumstances will prevail and we'll go back to the old normal. But if we keep doing what we've done, we will not get a different result.
A small round of applause there. Benjamin, quick word.
Yeah, just
and a bigger one from there.
Just a comment on what Nicola said. I fully agree with her that companies should take into consideration the risk of supply and integrate it in its cost. But the reality is that they don't do that at all today. And we have to work with them to raise the level of awareness of the risk. And you know, it's a kind, I mean, in insurance has a cost. It's a kind of question of insurance. You have to pay for the insurance. But currently, the company, they would like to have the insurance without the cost of the insurance, which is not possible.
People never want to pay for their insurance.
Yes.
I think that's the sort of hard reality of life for
individuals.
as
So
much as
we
for
collectively have to combine government support, the incentive that were mentioned, and of course the support of the EIB is very important, but also that the private sector really takes into account this supply risk. And we see today, we experiment that today, because as you know, there are all kinds of restrictions today in place for materials, that companies are still not prepared well.
Well, I'm just, first of all, I must apologize to the lady who had her hand up, because that question was too good and it's dominated too much of the discussion, so apologies for that. Please come and catch some of these speakers afterwards there. And I'm just going to leave hovering out there the last thought, really, which you don't need to answer, but actually the shocks that have come in the course of the last few weeks and months, not least from the United States' perspective on its European allies, perhaps in the long term will prove to be a very good thing for Europe in terms of, as Allard was mentioning, if you keep carrying on the same way, you've got a problem, and maybe that's the kickstart that Europe needs. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fascinating and absorbing panel. Could you please express your appreciation for our 5 panelists? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for that. I think it's a very good time. Yep, whichever way you want to come off, you come on off. A lot to think about, a lot to discuss. Best to do that over a coffee. We're going to take a short break now. I think the time will come up for when you need to be back here. It's, I think, in 20 minutes, maybe 30. Coffee served over to stage right. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you.